Okay, are
That was
most
the
of
end
you,
of it for me.
that was the end of it. Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right. So let's come back together. So what were they trying to measure?
Obedience.
Obedience, right? Okay, and what was the design? How did they operationalize that? Like, how did they go about finding out?
Through pain, not through pain, but like the amount, how, I don't know how to say it. The further he went in the experiment, even though he hurt like the pain of the other person, like
Mm-hmm.
that makes sense.
Yeah. So they're looking at how much somebody is willing, how far they're willing to go when provided feedback that was all fake, of course, right? No one was actually being hurt. No, nothing was being connected. But they had this task with word pairs and learning the word pairs, which was nonsensical, right? So it's a hard task that is hard to pair up those items and remember them. And every time they got it wrong, the idea is you're going to learn the task by introducing pain. And the way the apparatus that was created, right, showed an increase in pain from shock, right? Do you guys remember some of the measure on there? Started at like really low, and at the end, what was the marking?
Wasn't like XX or something like that?
Yeah. I mean, it was like extremely dangerous, and then there were 3 more levels after that, like XX, like, I don't know, that's kind of like dead to me, right? And so the idea is that even though the person who is doing the shock is thinking they're educating or helping this learner, they're the ones being evaluated, right? So how much are they willing to go along the side of that scale to complete the task, even though they are receiving like verbal feedback that the person is in a ton of pain, and they have a visual representation that they're about to give the person pain, right? It's a twofold piece. They know what they're doing, and they're getting feedback that it hurts. And then what was the key piece? There was something in there, like, why were they obedient, you think?
Because they were pressured by someone outside, like someone running the experiment. They kept saying like, keep going, teacher, and stuff like that. So they were getting outside feedback from like authority.
Yes, I think that's a key piece. It wasn't just any Joe Schmo, right? Like, had 2 people been, and actually we can segue into that. We're not going to watch that video tonight, but it wasn't a random person telling them do it. It was somebody with an air of authority because they had the lab coat and they were feigning as like a fellow experimenter, right? So they were kind of directing the study and being told you must continue, you should continue. And at that point, 65% of people went all the way to that dangerous level. What do you guys think about that?
Well, in the video, the guy that they showed, he's like after he looked at the authority figure and said like, well, you're responsible. Like he took the blame off of himself and put it on
Exactly.
the guy in the white coat.
Totally. And how much do you think, like, that people, if you think back to World War II, or even more currently, people who are following orders or feel like they're following orders, but are kind of washing their hands of it, as like, it's just what I'm being told to do, right? It diminishes your own sense of responsibility, and whatever internal struggle you may be having, you can kind of push that off or justify it as like, well, I was told to do it. That's huge, huge. Now, question for all of you. If this experiment was done today, because obviously this was done, long ago, what kind of results do you think we'd find?
It wouldn't be able to be done because it's unethical and they're withholding information from the testers. We learned all about this in my psych class when I was in high school, and like I remember our teacher even telling us that like there were either 1 or 2 participants of the study who committed suicide afterwards because the weight of like thinking that they did this to someone was so heavy on them.
Yes. So you're absolutely correct. Like, to completely replicate this experiment would never pass any institutional review board. People would be raising red flags because the impact, psychological and emotional impact of participating in the study, there's very, very high risk. Now, what if I tweak my question a little bit? how much do you think people would engage in what they would classify in their mind as like evil or terrible behavior because another authority figure told them to do it? Do we think that the study, right, like the concept of obedience, would that change now versus then?
I think yes, because it was a different time and people are more defiant nowadays and also like don't like authority right now.
Okay. Any other
Yeah,
thoughts?
I would agree with her. I mean, like, there's like protests going on because people don't want to wear masks. And
Right.
like, I mean, so yeah, that would happen.
Yeah.
I think that actually people would do it. Just because I mean, people do it all the time. They put the blame on someone else. And I think if they can justify in their mind that it's someone else's fault and it's like, and not theirs, that they would do it. I mean, I think maybe 65% would be too high for right now, but I still think it would be over 50.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of in that middle area too. I think that you'd find either one of two extremes. You'd find the people that would go all the way because like I think it was Jasmine talking. She was saying that they would just find the blame and put it on someone else, or they would just completely not do the experiment. Like once they found out what they were doing, they would just throw their hands up and be like, yeah, no, I'm not doing that.
Right. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I'm not sure the last time I've seen that video before. Then I also seen an updated video. I'm not sure where I saw that or if I was just like scrolling through YouTube when I was bored or something and just like came across it. But when I seen it again, it still was like a significant amount of people who like went all the way up because they was just like one of them was like a teacher. She was like, yeah, I know that he was faking. Like it sounded like a automated voice thing. And then other people were just like, well, you told me to keep going. So it was just like some people had different like meanings as to why they kept going, and some people were just like, I can't do this, and they stopped like midway regardless of what the authoritative person said. So
By the way, sidebar, Tashana, I love that you're like, when I'm bored, I scroll through YouTube for like scientific experiments and research and like seminal studies. High five. That is awesome. I play a silly game on my phone, but that's fine. Like to each his own. So you are absolutely correct. There is an updated version of this, and I will post it to our class site so that you can see that in fact, it was very high. Following authority was very, very high. The issue of obedience, and let's throw a little, wrinkle in the pickle here. What if there's money involved? You're going to be given $40 to participate in the study. Does that change whether you're obedient or not? Does that affect it, you think?
yes.
Yeah, it'd make you more inclined
I mean,
to keep going.
I don't know. I don't know if it would, because if you're still just getting paid $40 to do it, like, do you have to be obedient? You just have to participate, I guess.
I love that, right? Like, so that's the cost benefit piece, right? So it's kind of like if it's a terrible exercise and you're getting paid a certain high amount to do it, you're like, well, I'm making the money. I don't really care. So they can't really hold me back. Money is a huge motivator, right? So that's another so I'll add some of those studies so you guys can take a peek at them and see what that looks like. But the issue of obedience, bottom line, the question Milgram had was, is this an issue because of the current zeitgeist that we're in, the certain time in our lives that we are in the crux of World War II and all that, where people are seeking an authority figure to tell them what to do? The answer is no. It is not singular to those times. We are kind of geared as people to want to follow authority and to not want to defy authority. And I hear what you're all saying totally with protests. That's far more present now, but that is just a small percentage, I think, of our population that will fight back and do protests like that. So just fascinating piece. Now, side note, Izzy, you were bringing this up, like the issue of the lasting impact, right? Like in suicide rates with Milgram study, there's another seminal study that's the Stanford Prison Experiment study. Are we all familiar with that? Right, okay. So what I was saying earlier is somebody in the Milgram study, they were wearing like a lab coat. So they very much had an air of authority to them as being a researcher, scientist, doctor, whatever. In the Stanford experiment, people were randomly assigned to either prisoner or prison guard and fully took on all aspects of that role. And guards became abusive. They dehumanized the prisoners by, instead of calling them their name, they called them numbers. And the impact of that also was very long lasting. Now, I think they originally planned, I forget the exact duration. I think it was going to be several weeks to see the impact of that. And they shut it down after like 3 days because it was so terrible, the impact on people. And this is another one that had huge emotional and psychological impact. And I think there was a case of suicide also in that one. So, yeah, pretty huge. Research can go bad, folks. I mean, not that you suspected it wouldn't, but okay. I feel like we made a sharp right turn in how I was planning to teach today, but this was still worthwhile.
Hey,
Side note.
Moment.
Yes.
Sorry. Before you move on.
Yeah.
They said for the first experiment, the Milgram experiment, I think you
Yep.
said, it shows like back in the time, and you said they did it again. Did they ever do it where like the person who was getting shocked was a woman or someone younger than them or someone that would probably be like standard as like weaker by
Yes.
society? Did they ever recreate it like that?
They did. I want to say the more recent study, they also had somebody who was elderly. So I don't know if they did both gender, and I don't know how like much of a difference in age, but they did have somebody who was elderly who also reported they had a heart condition. So to see if that impacted whether they went through or not.
And they still shocked them?
Yeah. 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 So I'll share those. I'll put them on
Okay.
the announcement. Oh yeah, go ahead, Grace.
I think it's like really interesting that they did it during like right after World War II, because wouldn't people think like, oh, Germany, they can't trust, maybe you can't trust the people that say can lead us? Wouldn't they think like, I can't trust authority? Like, it's weird that they were so obedient, you know, or that most of them were.
So the study, and maybe this will shed some clarity. So the study was done at Yale, so back in the United States. And I
Yeah.
think the question was, you know, what does it say about our world that people kind of blindly followed? And even in the United States, you know, the Japanese internment camps, like these were very real things. So even though not maybe to the same degree as what was happening in Germany, but people were following authority and pushing aside any sense of personal humanity, right? And so I think that's why they were curious specifically about obedience and to see if that was still the case or if it was something about the times that we were in a period of war and social upheaval. And so the study took place in the 60s, so there was a bit of a delay since then. And the fact that he was able to replicate like just really inherent obedience despite all evidence that they shouldn't be following through shows that, again, that obedience back then, it kind of sheds light as to why people followed then, because if they're following now, right, like the sense of you just do whatever the authority says. Yeah. So I'll add the rest of those videos on an announcement tab, and then sidebar, I just added, this is kind of a workaround, our syllabus. I added the refreshed syllabus to an announcement. Please let me know if you can actually click it. It's as an attachment, so I'm hoping that works and that might have been our workaround. So let me know. You can write something in the chat to let me know that.
It works. I tried it when we were on break.
Yes, yes, great. Okay, so from current slide. Okay, can we all see frequency claims? Okay, super. So next is the association claims, which is what we talked about earlier, how two things relate to each other. So they argue that one level of a variable is likely to be associated with a particular level of another variable. It has to involve at least 2 measured variables, and when they're associated, they're known to be correlated. Now, we're going to talk about this a little later in the semester, but when you talk about correlations, you talk about either a positive or a negative correlation. And I just need to be clear, it has nothing to do whether the association is positive, like we would measure it as something good or positive, or negative or something bad. It has everything to do with the slope of the line, which you're like, eek, eek, why are we doing math? Here, let me grab this so I can show what I mean. So this is my son's doodle thing. So yeah, we get fun things like this. But on the back side, okay, let's test out if you guys can actually see what I'm doing. Okay, can you guys see this? Okay, so this is saying as one variable increases, the other variable increases. The more I study, the greater my grade goes up. The more I eat donuts, because they're delicious, the more the scale shows a high number, right? The more weights I lift at the gym, the more muscle mass I build. So this is called a positive correlation or a positive association. Again, it doesn't have to be about something positive, right? The greater the rates of unemployment, the greater the crime rates. I'm making stuff up here, but you know what I mean? So this could be, again, a positive correlation, even though it's about something that's fairly negative, okay? When you have a negative correlation, it's because the slope is negative, which means as one variable goes up, the other one goes down. The more I exercise, the less I weigh, okay? The more I sleep, the less I work or study, right? Okay, does this make sense? Positive and negative correlations? Just so you know, and you probably covered this in stats, correlations range from 0 to 1. The closer you are to 1, whether it's -1 or +1, the stronger the correlation. In the social sciences, if you get anything above 0.5, you are rocking it. It is a solid correlation. And again, it could be -0.5 or +0.5 in either direction. Questions about that? Kind of makes sense? Okay. And look at that. I drew for no reason because I already have a graph. Okay. So the relationship longevity, how long you're in a relationship, and the express or the amount of expressed gratitude. When we look at something like this, you're looking at the line of best fit, which means if we were to kind of centralize a line that would express or try to capture most dots. Can you guys, by the way, sidebar, can you see my cursor on the screen? Okay, super. So yeah, this would be the line of best fit. So this would be a positive correlation, right? The greater the expressed gratitude in a romantic relationship, the longer you will remain in that relationship. That's what that's showing. Okay, let's look at the negative association. Your ability or skill at multitasking and how often you multitask, okay? So again, this would be a negative correlation, okay? Which, I don't know, I feel like I could go back and forth on that. If you're really skilled at multitasking, maybe you do it more often. Can go back and forth on that. Okay, here's a zero association or very small correlation. So a child's weight from not obese at all to more obese to the time that they eat dinner. The line here would be closer to this, like a straight line across, which would be a slope of 0, right? Showing there is very little relationship between these two variables. Okay, does that make sense? Hopefully this is a refresher for all of you back from your stats days as to what a correlation is. Okay, so how can we make predictions based on those associations? Because again, when you're looking at statistics and looking at these claims, what does that mean, right, for future associations? So Some association claims can be useful because they help us, in fact, make those predictions. The stronger they are, the more accurate the prediction. But both of them, positive or negative, can help us make predictions. So for instance, let's go back to this, the relationship and the longevity. If we see that a couple has a really, really high level of gratitude, perhaps we can predict that they will remain in that relationship longer. Okay, does that make sense? So it's almost like following the line or the slope of the line so that you could predict where the next dot would be. Again, this is like back to your geometry days or whatever days it was that you learned about the slope of a line. Okay, so here are some verbs that describe associations and causal claims. Why do we care about that, right? Well, in social sciences, we talk about research and we talk about numbers using our words. We use certain verbs to give a hint as to what statistical method was employed. So our words actually have a pretty huge impact. So if we're saying something like it's linked to, or it's at higher risk for, or is associated, or is correlated, we're looking really at an association claim. Whereas if I say something is causing or affects or changes or worsens or increases, those are verbs that are pointing to a causal claim where there's more of a direct link between the two variables, whereas the other one speaks more to the relationship between them. So it's important because when you read research articles and you see those, you can already tell, okay, so they're making a causal claim here. So how did they do that? Or they're making an association claim. So there's a relationship between these two variables, and this is how they're saying that they're associated. Okay. This is so sad. You guys can't do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add it to our class site. There's a driving anger scale that's not very long at all. And then there's kind of a engaging in sensation seeking scale to see the relationship between the two. You guys can take a peek at them for the sake of this class because it's all online. We're not going to get to take it as a class, but it's something that's kind of interesting. Okay, we touched on this already, but not all claims that we read about in the popular press or on social media are actually based on research. Oftentimes, it's not research results that are presented, but more of a broad story or concept or idea that's backed by intuition. We talked about that last week, right? Like, what is actual science and experimental research versus what is your intuition or gut telling you? The two are very different. So some of these have really come through. Actually, again, I want to sidestep some of the political stuff that's going on or COVID related things, but I'm sure you'll know what I'm talking about. It's when people have like this amazing insight, like this one. These are headlines. So 12-year-old's insight on autism and vaccines goes viral. We should all listen to this 12-year-old because it's amazing what they think and say, right? Or you guys can think about some things in relation to COVID recently that's come out where people had amazing explanation. You're like, well, is this an authority in this field that I should be trusting? So some claims are based on personal experience or intuition, and others are based on authority. It's important for us as researchers and thinkers and critical thinkers of this human race to really be able to decipher between the two. Because not all claims, again, even if there's a frequency claim attached to it, like my experience says 80% of people, if they jump off of a deck, they actually learn to fly. Nonsense, right? But I could have data that somehow is backing that up, or maybe my personal experience backs that up. But that doesn't mean because I attached a number that it is true and should be believed as a research-based claim. Are we understanding kind of the difference? And can you guys see how that can be problematic in our world when people do that? Yes. Okay. So how do we interrogate those three claims using some of those, the big validities that we talked about at the start of the class? So validity is the appropriateness of a conclusion or a decision. Did you arrive at that point or decision or whatever appropriately? Did everything point in the right direction? For instance, if you were taking a test and I was trying to evaluate your knowledge of statistics, let's say, but instead it was a test on how to conjugate French verbs, you'd be like, what the what? None of this is statistics, right? That would not be a valid test of your statistical knowledge, right? It's not a valid measure of it. Okay, so valid is what we consider reasonable, accurate, and justifiable. And when we look at measuring validity within the world of research and statistics, these are the 4 ones that we look at: construct validity, statistical validity, internal and external validity. So let's break them down each apart. Construct validity is how well the variables in a study are measured or manipulated. Okay, so again, we take big concepts like the concept of obedience we just talked about before, and we operationalize it, and then we find a way to measure it. Well, how well are we actually measuring that exact thing, that variable, to measure that previous concept? So if I'm trying to measure obedience, and the way I decide to measure it is if a dog, you know, is sitting, actually, that's maybe not a good example, but if some random person told you to do something and you're like, I don't really care about that. Sorry, there's a lot of mosquitoes all of a sudden around me. I'm not going crazy. So if you did that, then you're like, well, but that's obedience to a random stranger. Why would anyone want to obey them? But it has to be somebody of authority, right? So again, if you're not measuring it accurately to what the concept is, that's not good construct validity. Okay. External validity, that's the extent to which the results, it's like literally in my app, the results of a study generalize to a larger population. So if you're taking a measurement of a small sample of school children, for instance, and then you're trying to say that it applies to all students across the United States, you better make sure that your sample is representative of the United States. So again, generalizability and how well it extends to other concept, other groups, other samples, that would be your external validity. Is it valid to external factors? The statistical validity is the extent to which the data supports the conclusion. So it's important to ask about the strength of the association, how well they're related, and whether it is actually statistically significant. Those should be familiar words to you guys. In research, that's always what we're looking for. Is it statistically significant? So it's the probability, that idea of statistical significance is what is the probability, what is the odds that the results that you got were only by chance and in fact do not reflect that there's a relationship between those variables. That is statistical significance. And in this case, that's looking at statistical validity. Lastly, internal validity is how well instruments or questions within instruments hang together to measure the same construct. So it's a relationship between variable and another and the extent to which one rather than the third one is responsible to the changes in that variable. So you can look at it in terms of psychometrics, your test construction, how well items hang together again to measure the one particular construct, or how well one item is impacting your dependent variable rather than some other variable, for instance. It's a lot of information on validity. Note, exams will ask questions about things like that. So not necessarily fleshing out in huge details what each of them are, but the fact that there are 4 should be something that you know. Okay, so here's kind of a cheat sheet. Construct validity is how and where the data was collected. External validity, is it representative of the population at large, right? Can it be generalized? Statistical validity, what's the margin of error, right? It helps for us to estimate how true it is for the entire population. So that's looking at, again, the statistical significance. Okay, again, if we're looking at association claims, the construct validity is how were frequency and ability to multitask measured. That's one example. External validity does that claim actually generalize to other people or other context? And the statistical validity would be, what is the strength of that association? How do we see that? Okay. 2 possible pitfalls. When we look at statistical validity, we need to avoid making 2 incorrect conclusions. There's a type 1 error, type 2 error. Type 1 error is when you claim there's an association between 2 variables when in reality, none exist. That's called a false positive. A type 2 error is essentially you missed a connection. So you failed to find an association between 2 variables when in fact one existed. Both of those are problems, right? Because we want to report data as accurately as possible. In what domain do we hear about false positives recently?
COVID test.
COVID tests, right? So whenever somebody uses a new instrument of measurement, you want to know how sensitive it is and how specific, okay? Those are 2 concepts that tie right into type 1 and type 2 error. How sensitive means how well is it going to identify somebody who would test positive? Meaning, let's minimize type 2 errors, okay? So we see a high rate of sensitivity, meaning we are not going to miss cases. Specificity is, well, okay, yeah, now we've not missed a lot of cases, but are we really sure that we're not actually coming up with some false positives? The more specific you are, the more you reduce your type 1 error. So those are 2 correlated terms, or there we are. They're associated with type 1 and type 2 errors, and very apt right now to what's going on, right? We want to have really good testing, but when you test and you come up with tests really quickly, those are the 2 potential pitfalls, right? Because tests need a lot of time to be developed, and so you want to try to avoid those 2 errors. Does that make sense? Okay. Type 1, type 2 errors. Okay. So I want to spend just a little bit of time because I feel like I've given a lot of examples of the other 3 internal validities, but I spent a little less time on that. So frequency claims, so this would be, for instance, 4 in 10 teens admit to texting while driving. To measure internal validity, usually we're not asserting causalities, as a less of a problem, so it's not quite as relevant specifically with frequency claim. For association claims, like people with higher income spend less time socializing, you're not asserting causality as much, but you're still looking at the strength of the association. So when you're doing that, when you're looking at internal validity, you want to make sure to avoid making causal claims in that particular domain. Specifically with causal claim and internal validity, you want to make sure that there was an experiment that was done, right? There's no other way around that. You can't just make these claims without it. And you want to make sure that the study achieves temporal precedence, meaning you had some sort of pre-test or some sort of pre-measure or first measure, then you measured again. So there's a length of time so that you can show that A led to B. That would show good internal validity. Okay, and lastly, you want to make sure that it's controlling for alternative explanations, and that's true of everything, right? So this is in your textbook. You can feel free to refer to it, obviously, as you're studying. It just kind of gives you a quick snapshot of the different types of validity with those examples that we talked about earlier this evening. Okay. We just talked about temporal precedence. Again, that's like making sure that you have a previous measurement and then a later measurement so that you can say that it's really A that led to B, right? There needs to be a period of time between both so that it shows a causal relationship. Covariance, that's really more like a correlation. So it shows that both variables vary at the same rates and move in the same direction together. So as one changes, the other changes accordingly. So same as what I just described right here. And then internal validity in this term, it's the method that ensures that there's no other plausible alternatives for changes observed in B, that A is the only thing that changed. So that's making sure that you've controlled for every other possible variable. So it points to really, this is it. This is the reason why there's been a change. Okay. So experiments can help to support claims. So this is the idea. This is one of the experiments again in your textbook. So this is the mean increase in full scale IQ. So these are scores, right? So that's the increase that was observed. And that's for each group of 6-year-olds who completed the study. And again, this is the different things they were exposed to. So there's 2 methods of music that they were introduced to. One was on the keyboard, the other one was voice lessons. Third was still in the arts, but not music, so drama. And the last one was no lessons at all. So quick question. Why do we want to include in this experiment something that would have no lessons? Why is that important? Control group, okay. The other thing it's measuring is that maybe IQ changes over time, right? So like if we have, this is over time, we measured IQ, we introduced a class, we measured IQ again. So maybe just naturally over time, or after being exposed to 2 rounds of IQ, the second time you know how to test in a way. So you are controlling for that, for just random experiment. Now, why would we include drama? No wrong answers here. Throw out your thoughts.
Well, in some ways, it's kind of like another type of intelligence. So it's measuring not just music being like a sole factor in intelligence. It's giving another aspect of, here's another art that could possibly affect someone's intelligence.
Right. And in fact, this could be woodworking, or this could be, you know, any other class, right? So because really what we want to know is it music that's in fact leading to a higher level of IQ, or is it having the exposure to a new class, whatever that class is? So the purpose of this is to also control for part of that, right? It's finding another reason. So whenever you do an experiment, you got to think through, is it possible that it's just going to change over time regardless of the introduction of a class, or is it just going to change because of the introduction of a class regardless of whether it's music or not? And now this is saying, no, actually, if you look, it seems like music, specifically, they had keyboard and voice lessons here, specifically music led to a larger increase in IQ, okay? So that would be the way we could look at those exact things. Now, one thing we would need to make sure is that there was random assignment. What does that mean? What does it mean to have random assignment in an experiment?
There's really no like prerequisite or any sort of like determining factor as to why you went to that group. It was just kind of, you go there, you go here, you go there.
That's exactly right. So when you have a sample of people that are going to participate in your study, you can't say boys go into this class and girls go, unless that's part of your experiment, right? But this is not saying boys have an increase in IQ if they take music lessons, right? This is saying children. So there needs to be random assignment. There needs to be some random exposure. Now, let's flip this on this head. This is just IQ and music lessons. What if it was actually somebody who had cancer and they were testing out different drugs, right? Like you couldn't say, you couldn't decide, right, and kind of play God in a way that like you're just going to get a placebo and you're going to get a life-changing drugs, right? That's not something an experimenter ever wants to do. Random assignment is definitely the better way to go. And in fact, with kind of drug treatments like that, you're going to have a swapped group too. So you'll do placebo and treatment, swap placebo and treatment to really make sure that everybody has access to the treatment, especially if it's effective. Okay, so this is a little insight on how we can conduct research, especially when we're looking at causal claims. Okay, what happens when mistakes are made with causal claims? So again, we talked about this one, the family meals. Does it really curb eating disorder, right? Is there any other variable that it could explain this away? Was there temporal precedence with that one, right? Did we try beforehand, did we measure the rate of eating disorder, and then we introduced family meals to see that there was actually a change, right? Do early language skills reduce preschool tantrums? So how are you introducing that? Are you helping, toddlers learn those early skills? Are you not? Could there be anything else? I will tell you right now, I think I shared, I have 4 children, and they had different rates of language ability and very different rates of tantrum, right? Like, seems like personality in and of itself would be a pretty big factor that you could not just not measure or account for. So it's not just language skill that's leading to a lack of tantrum, right? So when we're designing a study, it's important to not be so focused on the given variables we're measuring that we're excluding all others. And similarly, when you guys are critiquing or reading articles, that you're thinking really critically, like did the authors really just make this linear path, this causal claim, when really I can think of 5 other examples right now, or 5 other variables that nowhere in their study they said they controlled for. All of you guys are capable of doing that because you're all super smart, and I want you guys to really, I encourage you to do that, to look at research critically. Okay. So when we start interrogating causal claims, or we put on our skeptic hat, these are some of the questions I want you guys to really think through. So internal validity is going to be the most important. You really want to make sure that they did not exclude another variable that could actually explain away a lot of the causal relationship they discovered. You want to also look at the construct validity. Like, for instance, how well was IQ measured? What tool did they use, and did that actually measure IQ? How did they go about giving a music lesson? What was their instruction like? And was that actually teaching students about music? External validity. Can we generalize those results to non-Western countries? Again, could we talk about other instruments? We just looked at the keyboard and voice. Would drums also do it, right? I don't know. You want to consider some of those things. And then when you think about the statistical validity, you want to really make sure, was there actually, the graph showed us there was a difference, but was there actually a statistical difference? What was the effect size? Again, how many students did we have, or children did we have in each group? Do we have a large enough sample that we can make meaningful interpretations from it? Okay, and again, is there a meaningful difference in real life? Like, does that actually, is it impactful? Did it happen? So you need to try to prioritize those validities too when you're constructing your research project, and also as you're evaluating them. So you need to think through what is most important in the study as I'm creating it and as I'm investigating it. And it really depends on what is the claim that's being made by the researcher. Some of that will differ. If the claim is, look at this study, now the entire world needs to know about it, well, you're really looking at external validity, right? Does it actually generalize to everybody else, right? So it's just really going to depend on what the claim is looking like. With internal validity, it is critical for causal claims, but not for frequency and association claims, because as I mentioned, there's less of that causal relationship that's being done. So it's not like when it's a non-causal relationship, other variables could play a role in it as well. You're not saying that it's not. Like I was saying earlier, an association claim is looking at a correlation. So yeah, those 2 variables have an association, but that is not excluding other variables from also having a relationship with one another. I hope that's making sense. Are people tracking with this? Yes, okay. Oh, I thought I had 4 more slides to go. Okay. Questions, comments, concerns? Lay it on me.
So I'll be the first to start. So
Yeah.
with the validity, am I saying right? Or
validity? Yep.
Okay. So basically, how do you like it? It said it just in a slide, but how do you know like which one is like the correct one when you're doing it? Like it said it depends, but like how do you know for sure? Like how can you clarify that?
So how do you know that you have a valid experiment? Is that what you're asking? Yeah. Okay. So first you want to see what's your end goal. right? If my end goal is going to be to have a causal link, I think somebody was thinking about doing birth order, right? If I'm going to say there's a causal link between being firstborn and being happy, right? That's pretty strongly stated. Then you're looking at excluding any other variables that could play a role into that. That would be your internal validity. Second, it would need to generalize to all firstborn everywhere in the world, right? Or everywhere in the United States, depending on your study. So you'd want to take a look at that. Third, construct validity would be, how am I measuring, what did I say even? I just forgot. Firstborn and success or happiness?
Happiness, yeah.
Happiness. Thank you for listening to my own ramblings. So firstborn and happiness, then how am I measuring happiness? And is that actually a valid construct? Am I just saying, how often do you cry per day? Well, is that a measure of happiness? I think researchers might say that's a little myopic in terms of a view of happiness, right? And a bit negative. And then statistical validity, that's looking at the results that you get from your study, and is there a significant difference? Which would mean, for birth order and happiness, is there a statistical significance in happiness amongst firstborn versus lastborn? So that's how you would evaluate it. Just, I gave you kind of a random example, but those are the 4 types of validity and how you would go about it. Does that help a little bit?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
No problem. Other questions for me?
When are we starting the research thing? Because I know some of us got our groups already, but when is that like officially starting, and when do we need to like start working on it?
So as soon as you have a group fully formed, because right now I've seen on the forums there's been a lot of discussion, but once you're like, hey, we are solid, here's our 4 and here's our idea, create an email with all the folks in it, because I'm having a hard time tracking who's and what and whether a group is closed or not. So shoot me an email once that's done, and then I'll start giving you instructions as to where you should look in the research to start gathering articles. That'll be step 1, gathering articles and creating a reference list. Then you'll start talking about the literature review, which I'll talk about in class. I think that's in 2 weeks. And how to organize your data and how to write a mini literature review. So it's starting like right now, like we should be picking topics, like I said, like we should be active on that. And if you are struggling to come up with a topic, please reach out to me. I'm happy to point you in some direction. Again, I want it to be something that's fun and interesting to you guys, and I want it to be a safe topic so you can ask people that you know to fill out your survey. So that would be my only limitation. I'd rather you not go like political or super personal about their lives, you know, just broad and fun. Stress management, you know, what do you do? Yeah. Do you guys feel like you have some good ideas on that, or are you feeling lost about that? Mix. Okay. I see 50% of you. The other 50% are black boxes, so I'm not sure. Please email me, text me, call me if you have any questions. I can be helpful in any way. Okay, on my end, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tag those links for the research videos on Milgram. They're just kind of, they're fun to watch. I don't know, fun. That seems like the wrong term right now. Depressing as to the state of our world. But anyway, they're interesting nonetheless. I'll add those on there. I feel like there's something else I was supposed to do too. Oh, I need to talk to Chad. I almost said Zach. Chad about Course Connect and due dates. If somehow it's not working on there, shoot it over to me via email. I'll receive it that way and grade it. If you've emailed me and I've not responded, text me. Somehow I may have gotten eaten. Days are very long right now. I've got my 3 kids back in school, virtual learning at home. We're doing that. Also just lots going on in the real estate world. So if, you know, like this morning I was in 3 meetings, all of a sudden I had 72 emails, like, oh, how did that happen? So if somehow I lose track, I'm very sorry. So shoot me a text and be like, Chica, check your email. I mean, maybe with more respect than that, but that's cool. Okay, we good to go? Okay, did this feel better having a break in between?
Wait.
Yes. Oh yeah, Grace, go ahead.
So I'm looking at the syllabus right now. I just like don't want to get confused again because I didn't know about the article critique.
Yes.
So we don't really have much of an assignment due next week besides getting that certificate done and like
That's
reading.
correct. That's correct.
Okay.
No, that's good. Always better to double check.
Yeah.
Also, you may have gotten this from me already. I'm very flexible. Like, no, life was crazy. Just let me know. I just want to be on board and help you out to get it done. We're all grown-ups here. I'm not trying to be like, well, you were 2 minutes late. That's just, I don't operate that way. Okay. Hey, I love seeing the puppies and the animals. We should do that more often too. Makes it kind of fun. Okay, have a great night, everyone. We'll see you all very soon. Bye-bye. Have a safe holiday weekend. Whatever you're doing, have fun. Do it safely, away from other people. Okay, talk to you later. Bye.